All right, let's talk about a choice that's on a lot of people's minds these days: elective egg freezing. Now, this isn't going to be some super technical deep dive into the medical science. Nope. We're going to focus on something that comes way before that, something that's way more important for anyone even thinking about this. And that's the questions you absolutely have to ask yourself before you even think about stepping into a clinic. Think of this as your guide to making a decision you can feel truly good about.
So let's start with a major reality check right off the bat. This comes from leading medical groups like the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, and they are crystal clear on this. You've probably heard egg freezing called an insurance policy, right? Like it's a simple, guaranteed baby just waiting for you on ice. But the truth, well, it's a lot more complicated. It's a non-guaranteed path, and really truly getting your head around that is the first and most important step.
And this is a huge deal right now in Singapore, where the procedure was recently legalized for women between 21 and 35. But here's the interesting part. The government also made counseling mandatory for every single person who does it. And that tells you a lot, doesn't it? It signals just how big and how personal this decision really is. The kinds of tough questions that come up in that counseling, that's exactly what we're going to walk through together today.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by digging into the personal stuff, the deep down reasons for even making this choice. Then we're going to hit the reality check. We'll look at the actual data, the success rates, the risks. From there, we'll get practical, mapping out the steps you take. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by focusing on what this is really about, giving you the power to make your own confident choice.
So before we get into any of the science, the costs, or the logistics, this whole journey has to start with you. It has to start with some deep, personal reflection. This whole first section is all about asking why. It's about looking inward and being really honest about your motivations, your fears, and your doubts.
And this is probably the toughest question, but it's the most important one. You know, in many cultures, and especially in more conservative Asian societies like Singapore, there's a ton of pressure around getting married and having kids. So it's so important to untangle what you truly want from what your family, your friends, or just society in general expects of you. The point here isn't to judge it all, it's just to make sure this decision is 100% yours.
And that leads us to a really common myth. A lot of people assume that egg freezing is all about career-driven women who are just too busy for kids. But the research, well, it tells a totally different story. Big studies show that for a whopping 85% of women, the #1 reason was not having a partner they wanted to have children with. Career planning? It was actually way down the list for most people.
And that's where the specific legal rules in Singapore become so important. The laws here are very strict. You've got that age limit of 35, but the real kicker is this. Only legally married women can actually use their frozen eggs for IVF. That means single motherhood by choice is officially discouraged. Your access to your own eggs is tied directly to having a legal marriage certificate.
So, given those rules, this is the unavoidable follow-up question, right? If the main reason you're doing this is because you haven't found a partner yet, you have to seriously think about the possibility that you might not, or that you might just change your mind about having kids later on. This isn't being negative, it's being realistic. After investing so much time, emotion, and money, what happens to your eggs then?
Well, you do have some options, but each one has its own emotional weight. You could have the eggs disposed of. You could donate them to another woman who's struggling with infertility, which is an amazing gift. Or you could donate them for scientific research. There is a fourth path, exporting your eggs to use with donor sperm somewhere else. But man, that is a tough road. Single mothers in Singapore can face a lot of social hurdles and policies that aren't exactly friendly when it comes to things like housing or taxes. It's a huge undertaking.
Okay, so we've dug into the emotional why. Now it's time to shift gears to the factual what. This is where we cut through all the marketing hype, all the feel-good headlines, and just look at the hard data. We're going to manage our expectations by looking squarely at the risks and the real probabilities.
You hear this phrase, insurance policy, thrown around all the time. And it sounds so comforting, so secure. But is it really accurate? I mean, think about it. A real insurance policy pays out when something happens. Egg freezing, though, it doesn't give you that kind of guarantee. It's more like buying a lottery ticket. It gives you a chance, for sure, but it is absolutely not a sure thing. So let's look at what the numbers say about that chance.
Okay, so what are we really working with here? Well, it all starts with this number, 13. That's the average number of eggs they can get in one freezing cycle for a woman under 35. Remember that number, 13, because the entire game of probability of whether this will work down the road It all hinges on how many healthy eggs you can get in the freezer, and that's just the average for one try.
Now let's see what that average of 13 eggs actually gets you. This table lays out the cold, hard math. To have a 50% shot, basically a coin flip, at having one baby, you need about 6 eggs. Okay, that seems doable in one cycle for a lot of women. But what if you want an 80% chance? Well, now you need around 14 eggs, which means you're probably looking at 2 full cycles. And for a 95% chance of success, you need to bank about 30 eggs. That can mean going through this whole invasive, expensive process 3 separate times. This is rarely a one-and-done thing.
And beyond just the numbers, we have to remember, this is a serious medical procedure, and it comes with real risks. The most common big one is something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, or OHSS. That's where your body just overreacts to the hormones, and it can cause some really bad bloating and pain. It's rare, but it can be dangerous. And then you've got the risks from the surgery itself, like bleeding or infection, on top of the weeks of side effects from the hormone shots, things like nausea, pain, and just feeling pretty crummy.
And then there are the risks that you almost never hear about, the kind of stuff that can really keep you up at night. There have been these heartbreaking, high-profile cases where the freezer tanks have failed, destroying thousands of eggs and embryos. Labs can go out of business, eggs can get damaged if they have to be moved, and for anyone in Singapore, this is crucial. There are no required insurance or compensation plans for these kinds of catastrophic failures.
And then, of course, there's the money. Let's talk about the cost, because it is significant. Just one cycle at a public hospital in Singapore is going to set you back somewhere between $7,000 and $9,000. At a private clinic, you're looking at $10,000 to $15,000. And remember that table we just saw, you might need 2, maybe 3 cycles. Plus, and this is a big plus, that price doesn't include the annual storage fees, which add up year after year, and it definitely doesn't include the huge cost of actually doing IVF later on.
Okay, so let's say you've weighed the deep personal why and you've stared the factual what right in the face. If you're still thinking, okay, maybe this is for me, this next section is your practical roadmap. This is the how, the where, and the when of making it happen.
So what does the process actually look like? Well, it's a major time commitment. It all starts with screening, ultrasounds, blood tests, that kind of thing. Then comes step 2, the stimulation phase. This is where you're giving yourself hormone shots every day for 2 or 3 weeks to get your ovaries to produce a bunch of eggs. And that means a lot of trips to the clinic for monitoring. Finally, you get to step 3, the egg retrieval itself, which is a quick, minor surgery done under sedation.
So how do you pay for all this? Well, this is a huge hurdle in Singapore. Unlike IVF for married couples, there are 0 government subsidies for elective egg freezing. You also can't use your MediSave account. What that means is you're on your own. It's coming out of your personal savings, or you're taking out a loan, or maybe getting help from family. That financial reality is a massive part of this decision.
In Singapore, your next big choice is where to go. You basically got 2 options. Public hospitals are way cheaper, which is obviously a huge plus. But that usually means longer waiting times, and it's harder to schedule all those appointments. On the other hand, private clinics, while they cost a lot more, usually get you in faster and can be way more flexible with your schedule. It's a straight-up trade-off, money for convenience.
And finally, you've got to figure out the when. This isn't something you can just decide to do next Tuesday. The whole process is time-consuming. You're going to need to take time off work for a bunch of appointments, sometimes on short notice. You have to line that up with when you're financially ready, right? And a lot of women also like to spend a few months beforehand just getting their bodies as healthy as possible. All of that takes some serious planning.
Phew! Okay, we've covered the personal, the factual, and the practical. We've gone through a ton of information, and it can definitely feel like a lot. So let's bring it all back home to the single most important idea in this entire process.
And this leads me to maybe the most surprising fact in this whole discussion. The longest studies we have show that the majority of women who freeze their eggs never actually come back to use them. In one big study, it was less than 40%. A lot of them end up meeting someone and getting pregnant naturally. Others just decided a different path for their lives. Now, that doesn't mean it was a waste of money. So many of these women say that it gave them incredible peace of mind when they really needed it. But it just proves, again, this is not a straightforward ticket to a baby.
And that's really the bottom line, isn't it? The whole point of all this research, all this soul-searching, it's not to get a guaranteed baby. The goal is to make a truly informed choice that you can feel at peace with, no matter what happens down the road. Whether your final choice is yes, no, or just not right now. The real power isn't actually in the frozen eggs. It's in the clarity and the confidence you get from making your own decision.
So the final question isn't whether you should do it, it's what choice, after looking at everything, is going to give you the most peace of mind.